Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast, listener-supported independent media. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Elijah Magnier returns to the show. We talk about the August 4th, 2020 explosion in the Beirut port. Details of what happened, political implications, cui bono, and more. Elijah has gathered information from sources on the ground and provided some of that information for the first time in this interview as an exclusive. There's also a bonus question for patrons, episode 175 Extra, Beirut Explosion and Political Implications, where we talk about the possibility of the faction aligned with Trump, Netanyahu, and Crown Prince Salman wanting to escalate while they can in anticipation of Trump and Netanyahu being out of power in the near future. We recorded this on August 6th, 2020. Magnier's here speaking to us from Belgium. Hello, Elijah, and thank you so much for taking the time at a time that I know you're swamped with this to talk to us. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for having me again, Joanne. It's always my pleasure.
I saw that you, on Twitter, you put out a message saying that you'd done some fact gathering, you've talked to some people, and that you're going to be writing about it. But you've also fended off a lot of the various quote-unquote conspiracy theories. Understandable that there would be, theories about who might be behind this, that you've sort of warded those off and attributed this to, the negligence and the ammonium nitrate that was pretty much abandoned in that warehouse, and various officials in Lebanon had tried to do something about it. They didn't. I think it's still a question, the fire that started, the adjacent fire that acted as a detonator for this ammonium nitrate, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, is still under investigation. But the official story in this case, you feel that it's pretty legitimate?
Well, if we look at the property of the AN, I'm going to call it AN, because the ammonium nitrate, we're going to repeat this word many times. It has the component of explosive mixture. If we look at it from its pure product as a pure composition, it is a very stable and should meet specified quality requirements to be used in production of industrial explosive. So if you look at all the European and international specification, it is extremely difficult to detonate. For that, for creating a detonation and use it as an explosive, it needs a substantial stimulus. This is what ISIS used to use in Syria and Iraq for many years. So what happened that in 2013, not in 2014, if I remember, on the 20th of November 2013, there was a shipment that coming from Moldova. It's flying a Moldovan flag, the Rossus, and it sailed from Georgia to Mozambique. And in its cargo, it had 2,750 tons of AN that was designated to an explosive company that deals with explosive in Mozambique. So it stopped in Beirut at the end of 2013, offloaded few agriculture machines, and was expected to upload goods from Lebanon to take it to Jordan on the way to Mozambique. So when the Lebanese authority inspected the ship, they found it unfit to sail. They found problems with the engine and problems with the body of the ship. And they did not allow it to sail again until the proper reparation are made. And this is where the ship was forced to stay in Beirut. So the Lebanese authority, after a while, discharged the cargo into a warehouse, and that is the warehouse number 12, and confiscated the cargo because the owner of the ship refused to pay the bill of the taxi, that is the parking at the harbor, which is very expensive. And they also did not pay the money for the sailor and the captain. Now, here is the dilemma. So the dilemma starts from the end of 2013, November 2013, to today. So for more than 6 years, 2,750 tons of AN remained in that Lebanese warehouse without being removed, relocated, or resell, just stayed in that position. It was not stored in a dry place. It was not stored in a ventilated place. It was not stored in a sealed area as it should be for any AN to be stored. And also the electrical installation in the storage area need to be resistant to the ammonia vapors. Now, all these specifications are unexisting in Lebanon. Therefore, we can start seeing that the ambience around the AN to protect it and to prevent it from being in contact with any explosive or to be mistreated, let's say, or to be exposed to hazardous possibilities were not taken. So what happened is last year, a captain at the National Security Forces in Beirut was doing an inspection at the harbor and discovered the warehouse number 12 and called his superior to inform him about the presence of the dangerous cargo at that specific warehouse. So he called his superior officer, a general it happened that I know personally, and that I called yesterday and today just to confirm a few things of the story. So he has instructed the young officer to provide a written report, take pictures of the warehouse, take videos, and send him the report with the recommendation. And also what was visible is the warehouse had a breach big enough for the passage of a human being. That was the problem because it may facilitate an entry of a theft. This is why it was important for them to close it and to make sure that nobody can steal from it. The recommendation of the general was to remove all the AN from their place, that the storage was not adequate, that it was leaking substance on the floor, and that it should be removed as soon as possible. And the report was sent to the president of the Council of Ministers, because the National Security Services, they respond to the Interior Minister and to the Prime Minister. And in the report, they sent a recommendation and they said what it should be done. But of course, the incompetence of the administration is so high that nobody even looked at this report or remembered its existence. So what happened on that day? 2 days ago, at 1500 local time, a blacksmith was asked to close the holes of the warehouse.
Oh boy.
To prevent potential smuggling of the content. So the blacksmith was not informed about the hazardous content of the warehouse, nor he was told to take the necessary precautions to prevent the spread of metal particles that produce fragments and can trigger fire. He was working, believe it or not, at a distance no further than 5 to 10 centimeters from the AM bags.
And was this to repair a metal wall?
It was repairing a metal door to close the bags inside to 2,750 tons of AN inside. And he opened the door and start welding the door just a few centimeters away from the stored bags.
Mm.
And the bags were lying on the floor with, of course, a clear substance leaking from it. So he thought it's just kind of a powder or white cement or clay or whatever. He just, nobody told him what he was dealing with and what he had in front of him. So once the job was done, he closed the hole that he was asked to close and he left. Now, that was at 1500 local time. So he worked for half an hour, and then he left. Between 1630 and 1700, people started to see the smoke coming from the warehouse. And when they saw the smoke, it means already there is a small fire picking up because the warehouse is quite big. So when they saw the smoke, firemen were called to deal with this potential fire. And they didn't know that the AN needs really a lot of water to deal with and to just
extinguish
stop the fire from spreading. And there is a need of evacuation of the whole area just in case the fire is not under control. And there were 10 men and women on the place trying to control a fire that had no clue what was it and how. And then that they were dealing with explosive, potentially explosive material. And this is the problem. Again, this is the problem is who called the blacksmith, who allocated the budget for it without offering the proper information. Was he informed? Was the blacksmith informed about the hazard of welding next to the AN? Why were the 2,750 tons left for more than 6 years in an unprofessional storage for no good reasons? Why the firemen were not informed about what they were dealing with? Why the area was not evacuated? Because nobody knew what they were dealing with, and there was a lack of information or communication of the information. And that is the problem. Now, the biggest question is, I know you're going to come, is who benefits from the explosion? But I leave to you to ask me the question you want.
Well, I've got like a million questions here. Who owned the warehouse? Do we know that?
Yes, it is the Lebanese government, represented by the Harbor Authority.
And I saw that you mentioned this is a key port. I mean, that's an understatement. We can't underestimate how important this port is. But who controls it? Like, there are our ports here. There's an authority that controls the port, but various companies own different facilities and all that. Is it easy to say who controlled this port?
Yes, it is easy for me to say it. Now, the port of Beirut, it's a very sensitive topic to talk about in Lebanon because, as everything in Lebanon, only people with good political connection are appointed in sensitive places where there is a lot of money going on. At the harbor of Beirut, there is a lot of money going on. The manifest of a shipment can be dealt with by bringing down the price and paying a forfait or paying what we say in France, a pot de vin, or money under the table to reduce the bill, manipulating the prices. And also, nothing goes in and out without paying some money or bribes to the officers in charge. And we're talking here about the head of the customs. We're talking about the head of the army intelligence service at the port, at the harbor. They all corrupted people. They all appointed by local influential politicians who are members of the parliament, who are political leaders. They have the monopoly to appoint. The Christian is appointed by the Christian, the Muslim is appointed by the Muslim, and the Druze is appointed by the Druze leaders. Therefore, each person allocates his man to the place, and this man becomes untouchable. That is the problem of the harbor.
So it's not any one particular sect. They actually share the responsibilities and the spoils, or the the money that comes through.
No, they're all responsible because let's take the general responsible of the intelligence services of the army intelligence service at the harbor. He's someone appointed by a political leader, and he's extremely corrupted. And there's nothing that goes through without him being paid enough money to be satisfied. So, is he intelligent enough? He knows what the AN does? Of course not, because these people are not appointed in these places for their competence, but for their connection. And
Right.
we take the customs, the person in charge of running the harbor. It was appointed by the ex-prime minister. The person who is at the leadership of the harbor, it is appointed by the ex-foreign minister. So these are the people who are in charge, and not because they are competent and they know what they have, they know what they are dealing with. It's because they are appointed, because they are selected by these politicians. And I can assure you that this is the first time each one of them has ever heard about the ammonium nitrate.
What I meant was that the government is shared between the different sects, as you mentioned, the Christians, the Muslims, and the Druze, and the parliament is made up of people aligned with all of those, and then the president and the prime minister, by constitution, I guess they have to be from one. It has to be, no one sect can control the whole government. So I guess what I was asking was, can any one of those political factions or sects be held responsible for this accident?
Well, no, because they are in power today, and the prime minister is just receiving one hit after hit because he wants to reform. He is accused of being a pro Hezbollah government when he is holding the American nationality, and he was a teacher at the American University of Beirut, and he's a Sunni and was selected by the Sunni prime minister, the ex-Sunni prime minister Saad Hariri, the favorite candidate of the Americans, the French, and once upon a time the Saudis. So Americans are asking the Europeans and the Gulf country not to support the government because they want to remove this man, because for more than 2 to 3 decades, only the pro-US corrupted politicians ruled the country. And when you remove these corrupted politicians and you put someone willing to work properly to bring the country forward and to stop corruption, he is attacked from all sides, to the point that these ex-prime ministers or politicians are traveling around the world asking everybody not to support Lebanon for the current government to fail and to be removed, the prime minister to be removed. So how this man is going to accuse anyone of being responsible when at the end of the day they will turn to a poor blacksmith who was asked to come and repair a door, and he will end up in jail for that.
Just sorry, but just to go back to the actual event itself, the initial story was that there was a fireworks factory that set off, and I think there really was a fireworks, at least warehouse, next door. Was that involved at all? Or it sounds like not. It sounds like it was the blacksmith and the warehouse door, and the ammonium nitrate, and that the fireworks were a secondary issue. Was there any truth to that?
Yes, the firework container or warehouse that was next to it was secondary explosion, and also there were containers with poisonous material product that came to Lebanon. They were landed in at the harbor in Beirut, and nobody knows today from where they came from. The destination was unknown because all the documents were removed thanks to the excellent corruption skills that these people have at the harbor. And all that blew up yesterday, 2 days ago.
Okay, that I didn't even know anything about that. So there's a third aspect to this. There,
Of course, yes.
the poisonous material, um, did that also go up in flames? Did it create poisonous gas, or is there any more to that story?
It created poisonous gas, but Lebanon was so lucky to have a windy day that was blowing from the southwest and took a cloud of poisonous cloud away from the capital toward the north and then toward the Bekaa Valley. And this is where it had dissipated in the air. And Lebanon was so lucky not to have a rainy day. Otherwise, you would have so many other more casualties.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even know about that. Um, just to go back a little bit, can you just talk about, and for people who aren't familiar with Elijah, he spent a lot of time in Lebanon for years. He's covered war and political situations there for decades and still is a frequent visitor. I think, Elijah, you generally, when you're on your way to the region, you start in Beirut. Is that true? You generally fly to
Yes.
Beirut from Europe?
Yes, because from Beirut I can go to Iraq, and from Beirut I go to Syria, and
Right.
from Beirut I go to Iran.
So you're there a lot. You know
Yes,
this. You know
yes,
this city very well.
yes.
Um, can you talk about the port? It's, that area. Kind of what's it like, and what is the area like that sustained the most damage?
That's a very good question. Actually, the affected area belongs mainly to people who are generally unfriendly to Hezbollah. They are people who are unfriendly to the president, that is Hezbollah allies, and they are people who are the Kataib, the right-wing party, and the Lebanese forces. They had their headquarters during the civil war in Karantina and Gemazi, and all this area is the area of the harbor. Therefore, this area that was immediately affected on, if we look at the north of the harbor, if you look at the south of the harbor, this is also, again, the very rich area where there are very fancy building, where there are flats that cost billions, and I say, millions, and I mean millions of dollars. We're talking about 5, 6, 7, even 15 millions of dollars for one flat in that
Mm.
area. So it's a very rich area. And the rest of Beirut that was mainly affected, it's a Sunni area. So you have on one side mainly Christian area, the majority Christian, and on the other side, the majority Sunni. And both sides are not Hezbollah's friends. Therefore, this is where logically you just take away all the conspiracy theory about CIA involvement or Israel involvement, and no need to go that further when we see the facts presented as a blacksmith working, as smoke coming out of the warehouse, as fire picking up for an hour and a half, and all these are the component that helps the explosion of the AN. So that's why you are asking about the area. So the destroyed part of Beirut is an anti-Hezbollah population.
And so this is why the rumors immediately began that, maybe it was a Hezbollah weapons storehouse or Iranian weapons storehouse, or that Hezbollah had a political motivation to actually make this attack happen. So is that the reason why those rumors began?
No, because really it doesn't deserve the answer for many reasons. First, the harbor is not an area friendly to Hezbollah. So why Hezbollah would go there to have one warehouse and stockpile its weapons and missiles or explosive or whatever. Secondly, warehouses in the Bekaa Valley in the south of Lebanon, on the borders between Syria and Lebanon, are not lacking for Hezbollah to store its weapons. And third, all the security services that are at the harbor, there are those who are pro-Hezbollah and those who are very anti-Hezbollah. Therefore, you can't have a warehouse that is supposed to be secret and use it in case of war against Israel in an area where everybody knows what the container has and the warehouse contains. And when the warehouse is open to people to inspect, can you imagine a Hezbollah warehouse with all these missiles that open to everybody to come and look around and inspect?
Yes.
I mean, Israel would bomb it in the first second in time of war, and that will be out of the game.
Right. I mean, there'd be no chance of us having a secure facility in that area from what you've explained.
The power of Hezbollah is to store weapons and missiles in a secret place, trying to hide it from the Israelis, to use it as a strategic storage place in case of war, not in an open space at the harbor where everybody walks around and there are 20 different security services.
Right, right. I took a look to see what the European news services were saying, what kind of take they had on them, and also Al Jazeera. And of course, Macron showed up today.
Yes.
And the France 24 reported that, as soon as he got there, I guess he was out on the street and there was an angry Lebanese crowd in central Beirut that, begging for help, saying, help us. Someone else said it was like an army that had mobilized in Beirut, a citizen army, cleaning up, handing out food, anti-government. But, also the central message was that the entire form of government in Lebanon needs to be changed, modernized, get rid of these sort of requirements for different sects to hold, some amount of power. The BBC talked about corrupt and incompetent leaders, which, based on what you said, is, not untrue. And Al Jazeera focused on whether this crisis would lead to a political change. And they had two guests, Habib Bata and Carmen Jeha, I think. And then Robert Fisk wrote a big thing about it. Of course, I went to see what he would have to say about it because I don't know if he still lives in Lebanon, but I know he did for a long time. And he uses all kinds of metaphors. He compares it to Pompeii, which was kind of curious given Pompeo. I don't know if he was trying to hint at that or not, but, he compares it to Pompeii and imperial corruption, overwhelmed by an act of God. He talks about how even if the number of deaths is not that high, he says, quote, it's the iconography that will be remembered. In a land which can scarcely cope with pandemic, exists under the shadow of conflict, faces starvation and awaits extinction, the twin clouds over Beirut, the one obscenely giving birth to the monstrous other, will never be erased. The collected images of fire and thunder and apocalypse, which the pools of videotape collected in Beirut, are one with the medieval paintings tried to compare through imagination rather than technology, the terrors of pestilence, war, famine, and death. He talks about a bankrupt country owned by generations, by venal old families, crushed by its neighbors, with the rich enslaving the poor, its society maintained by the very sectarianism which is destroying it. And he talks about the Lebanese revolution of the young, that they must surely now acquire new strength to overthrow Lebanon's rulers, to hold them to account, to construct a new and non-confessional modern state from the wreckage of the French-created republic, quote-unquote republic, in which they were mercilessly born. So He really goes all out there. And a lot of these, one of the commentators on Al Jazeera was talking about, putting a plea out to the quote unquote international community, which I'm never quite sure what that means. But they clearly see this as an event that can create, if not regime change, just complete transformation of the country. What do you think about that?
Well, Macron said he wants reforming the political system. And reforming the political system, I don't know how he intends to do it. I think maybe Macron wants to give up on his presidency as a president of France and becomes a president of Lebanon to reform the political system. Otherwise, I don't know how he's going to reform the political system. And the political system he's talking about, as I mentioned earlier, since 1990, we're talking about for the last 20 years or 30 years, all the political system was led by the friends of France and the friend of the United States. And the reform of the political system really started with Prime Minister Hassan Diab, who asked for competent ministers to come and join his cabinet, but he doesn't have the political support, exactly like Adel Abdel Mahdi, the Prime Minister of Iraq, who failed because he didn't have the political support and all the good intention and the expertise to move forward with the country. So reforming the political system is a request of the street, those who are fighting corruption. It's a request of the new cabinet. Unfortunately, within the new cabinet, there are also people ministers who represent the old political system. Now, if we look at who are the closest friends today of France and the United States, if we want to mention only these two countries, Walid Jumblat, the Druze leader, is the closest friends to these two countries, to their ambassadors who visit him on a very regular basis. He is actually one of their favorite men, and he is in the heart of the old political corrupted system. If we look at Hariri, his father landed in Lebanon with $3 billion and he was assassinated with $16 billion in his pocket, in his account, not easy to carry it in his pocket.
Yeah, right.
And we're talking about Nabih Berri, the speaker, who today created the equilibrium between the pro-Hezbollah and the anti-Hezbollah, between Iran and the Americans, between France and Russia. And he is one of the bunch of lords, corrupted lords who ruled Lebanon and continue to rule Lebanon. These are the people who every single president or a minister like Pompeo, when he lands to Lebanon, he goes directly to these people to meet. These are the favorite one of the West, the very corrupted politicians.
That's interesting. Now, ports are always valuable things. But right now, ports seem to be particularly valuable, and there are, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. They're buying a lot of ports, or taking control of ports. Is there anyone who's been trying to get control of this port by any chance?
No, but I forgot to mention one thing. Macron today went to Gemmazi. It's the area that I mentioned earlier that is hostile to Hezbollah, but also hostile to the Lebanese Christian president. This is why the choice of Gemmazi is not casual. The choice of Gemmazi is suggested by the embassy and by the people at the foreign ministry who are fully aware what kind of people would be in the street waiting for the president to show a particular kind of slogan against the president, the Lebanese president, Michel Aoun. because these people belong to the Kataib and the Lebanese forces, the pro-Israeli and the anti-Hezbollah, anti-Michel Aoun and his party. And when the president goes only to that area after the harbor, he is also sending a message. So this is also a way to send messages that observers and politicians understand. So he is supporting this really minority among the Christian, and I'm talking about the minority Christians in Lebanon, not the majority Christian are represented by the president Michel Aoun. That is a fact. And if we look at the parliament, we see that Michel Aoun has 28 ministers at the parliament. This is by far the double of all the other Christians put together. So why don't you go to the area where you have a common ground, or you go to different area? You go to this and the other, or maybe because his schedule doesn't allow him to. Well, I'm sorry, but this is not how we look at things as observers of the Middle East.
And then in recent years, Hezbollah gained seats in the parliament, right? If I remember correctly?
Yes, that is true. Hezbollah gained 13 seats at the parliament.
And that's considered to be problematic by, factions who are aligned with my country, your country. So that's a problem for them. Go ahead.
Sorry, they should teach Lebanon how to create a democratic system where you can exclude 30% of the population,
right,
yet continue to be democratic. I mean, for me, it's a bit difficult to do it, but I'm sure France and the US would find a way.
That's what they would prefer, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They want Hezbollah not to be presented. And you see, the problem is they don't understand Hezbollah, not to take the defense of Hezbollah, but Hezbollah is not an organization, is not a party. It is part of the population. People no organization in the world, and you see, my specialty in my study is terrorism and counterterrorism, apart from journalism and political science. And we study that no group can survive if it doesn't have the support of the population. Now, Hezbollah doesn't have the support of the population. Hezbollah managed to survive because it is part of the population.
Okay, that's interesting. And I guess the issue of the trial for the assassination of the former prime minister, what was that, 15 years ago or something?
Yes, 2005.
There are several Hezbollah defendants who, was it a sentencing that was going to happen or a verdict that was supposed to happen tomorrow?
It was supposed to happen tomorrow, but it was postponed until the 18th because they can't take advantage of the announcement. And this is where we understand that this is really politically manipulated, because if the verdict was announced to be declared on the 7th, then you announce it on the 7th. But unfortunately for them, the 7th is tomorrow, and it's a mourning day where people are still looking in the debris for their dear ones in Lebanon. And who would care about what the Special Tribunal for Lebanon verdict about one person when there are 80 people under the destroyed building, and there are 137, 140 people who were killed just the day before.
So is it to Hezbollah's advantage that this decision is postponed, the announcement of?
On the contrary, it is postponed to allow people to just to get used to the disaster that hit Lebanon 2 days ago, and they thought, well, perhaps in the next 12 days, because they said on the 18th they will announce it, people will listen to us more carefully, and we will reach the objective we want to mount the people against Hezbollah. Now, this is the objective, and Hezbollah honestly doesn't care because Hezbollah is aware of the result. Even from the first day the special tribunal started, because the result is accusing Hezbollah of being behind the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri. Now, if you look at the beginning when the Hariri was assassinated, we see that Saad Hariri, the son, the first thing he asked, and I don't know if you remember that, or the people who are listening to us will remember, he asked from Hezbollah to do the inquiry and to do the investigation. Personally, he asked from Hezbollah, and he said, help me to find out who did this. And then because it is the special tribunal, it's a kind of accommodating the American will, they think that they can curb Hezbollah's influence in Lebanon when they can't, because nobody in Lebanon is capable of standing up to Hezbollah and fight Hezbollah, because Hariri was assassinated and there are no proof of his assassination and who is behind it. Because I know many people who were interrogated by the special tribunal, and they came up to me and they said it's a kind of a joke for a simple reason. They put in jail the 4 head of security services for many years, and they were released for lack of proof. So why did you put them in jail? So why do you have any proof that somebody else did the job? Do you have something to declare and show apart from your conclusions and your speculations? And if you think that Hezbollah did this, what are going to be your steps? Are you going to send troops to Lebanon? Now, Lebanon is completely devastated by the explosion 2 days ago. It is completely devastated economically and financially because it has $110 billion deficit. It is completely surrounded because the US imposed the Caesar Act on Syria, closing the only border that communicates Lebanon with the outside world. It is imposing on all the Gulf countries not to help Lebanon, imposing on the European continent not to support Lebanon. So what else they can do?
Yeah, and speaking of the damages and the financial situation, I mean, from what I've followed some of Asani's work on this, who has studied the financial situation in Lebanon, is good, strong finance background in general, and it looked to me like an irreparable situation. Now they're talking about 10 to 15 billion dollars in damages, and the World Bank Group is stepping up, saying, we're ready to help you. But then I also hear the French saying, well, we're not going to give you money when you're so corrupt. So there's going to be, there's going to be conditions. There are always conditions. So I don't know. It just seems like a very vulnerable situation. If they need help, money, as always, to reconstruct. You have any thoughts on the financial aspect of this?
Yes, well, as you rightly said, which I agree with you, it is a very difficult situation and it's very difficult to repair. However, China offered to build the electricity, roads, tunnels, and train between all different parts of Lebanon without being paid ahead. They said, we build and we collect the money from our investment. And the Americans said to the Lebanese, you don't go toward the east and you don't ask from Russia any support, and you are not allowed to take the Iranian oil that Iran is ready to supply Lebanon with and be paid in Lebanese lira. Now, this goes against any logic, because if you don't want to help, and if you are asking everybody not to help, and you know that the situation in Lebanon is irreparable, Now, why you want to prevent the Lebanese politicians from going toward China and Russia and Iran, who are willing to help? Now, I will tell you why, because that's an obvious question. Then you might say why the Lebanese government doesn't turn toward Russia, China, and Iran, and any country willing to help. And the answer is very simple. Among the Lebanese cabinet, there are people who are pro-US. They're not pro-Hezbollah. Among the Lebanese cabinet, there are Christian and Shia and Sunni and Druze members of the parliament who wants to maintain a good and solid relationship with the US that is destroying their own country. This is why they don't want to anger the US, and they prefer for the rest of the population to starve, to look for the gasoline, to think about how they're going to get their bread and butter every day. I mean, this is what we used to do in countries at war. When I used to go and cover a country at war, I saw how people would be concerned only about how they would eat, how they would get a gallon of gasoline to be able to move around and escape from the bombed area. And if they can buy their bread, and from where, are there any vegetables around? And if they are if they can find a shelter when the bombs start raining, and you don't think about anything else. So they are reducing the Lebanese population, and I'm talking here, I'm not blaming the US and Europe, I'm blaming the Lebanese elite politicians who prefer for the poor and less favorite population to starve and not to offer them the electricity, not to offer them communication, train and transport, and not to allow them to get help from countries that are willing to help. And obviously, when you reach such a level of despair, you're going to stand up and go against all the political leaders. And I think most probably this is what the West wants, the population to rise and go against everybody. But then if they rise and go against everybody, the country is bankrupt. They're going to go and find nothing. They're going to find there are no money in banks. Even their own money is gone. There are no more money of depositors. Saving has disappeared. There's nothing left. And Lebanon is not allowed to go toward China, Russia, and Iran, and any other country willing to support this, support Lebanon outside the US hegemony.
Yeah, this sounds familiar. These are things that seem to keep happening over and over with different countries. I don't know, Venezuela comes to mind. But there are plenty of others in Syria. So I'm tempted to dig into to move out of Lebanon into Syria, but I don't think we have enough time for that. But I do want to mention your latest article, or the latest one I saw from July 28th. And now you have facts about what happened and you dismiss any maybe covert, anything else that may have been a factor here. But in your latest article, you note that you say the last time that the U.S. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, visited Israel was shortly before the assassination of Major General Soleimani at the Baghdad airport. And then Milley came back to Israel just a few days ago, so that would be like last week. And he met with the Israeli defense minister and, high-level, and Mossad director, high-level Israeli military intelligence and political officials. And it was in the context of confronting Iran and its allies in the Middle East, especially the threat posed by the Lebanese Hezbollah. And you talk about how it may be a hotter summer and that the topic was Iran, but also the dangerous escalation between Hezbollah and Israel, which is, flares up every so often, but happens to be flaring up now. And Israel removed the forces from the borders. And in the end, you say, are the U.S. and Israel preparing to ignite a war and change the rules of engagement? Are these defensive or offensive measures? And when will Hezbollah respond by selecting an IDF target to kill? So, knowing that that this visit, in the past, this kind of a visit has preceded a major operation of the U.S. and Israel, and so you were almost expecting something like this. Why did you not become suspicious when this explosion in Beirut happened?
Because, as I said, it is not in the interest of Israel to destroy the area where their likely unfriendly people live, and there is no benefit from it. So there is no benefit for Israel to see the people who are most likely to rise against Hezbollah to be willing to leave the country, to become very poor and homeless, and have no more energy but to repair their homes and find a way to survive. So these people are to no help to Israel. They can't support Israel and the US. This is why the European rush to help them, and they're willing to do something about that area.
Okay.
That's why it is. I don't think Israel is doing it, and also because the circumstances are very clear. All the experts in different sources in Lebanon, those who are not against the US and those who are against the US, both concur that this is not an outside operation. It is just the ignorance, incompetence of the people in charge of the harbor.
Okay, gotcha. Now, Lebanon imports something like 80% of their needed goods, things like that. Is this the only port? Do they have other ports? It doesn't seem like they've got a lot of options. I mean, there's Syrian port, but I don't think that's the infrastructure of the Syrian port in Latakia is anything on the scale of Beirut. What is the situation with, other options and ports in that area?
Well, it is true that the Lebanese port received 90% of Lebanon's import, and it's a very good hub for transport from and to different countries. However, the Tripoli port, there is the Sidon port, and there is a Tyre port.
Okay.
Three other ports that can. China offered to refurbish and to rearrange the port in Tripoli in the north in a way that becomes an international port that can be enlarged and fit to receive any kind of ship. And the Lebanese government rejected the offer for fear of the Americans. But at the time being, there are these three ports that can be used, and I think Lebanon now has little chances to refuse the Chinese offer unless the prime minister is under pressure where the members of the cabinet will refuse the Chinese offer.
That's interesting. There are so many other things I would want. I mean, there's also the whole East Mediterranean natural gas situation, but we don't have enough time to get into that. There's, the unrest in the trouble in Golan Heights again. Idlib is flaring up. It looks like maybe they were going to make a final move there, but I think we'll have to save that for another conversation because I have one last question for you, our bonus question for patrons. But first of all, let me let you. Maybe there's some other comment you want to make before we take this to the patron segment. Did you have anything else that you might want to say before we get into this?
No, I mean, you tell me what you want to say, but I would like to say one thing about the Lebanese cabinet, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Um, a few days ago, the foreign minister offered his resignation and left the cabinet. That foreign minister was a purely pro-US foreign minister, Lebanese foreign minister, that the cabinet selected him just to give sign to the Americans that we are not against you, that you have people who are your friend in the cabinet. And he offered his resignation because many members of the cabinet and their leaders, political leaders, among the Shia, the Sunni, the Druze, and the Christians, have their money abroad, and they are afraid of sanctions against them, where the Americans can freeze their assets that they have stolen for so many decades from Lebanon. This is why the Americans understand and know very well that they hold something on this government. So when they say this is the Hezbollah government, this is a pure fantasy, because the Americans are support the corrupted leaders, the corrupted political leaders, because these leaders need a foreign account to put their money in. And this is when they can hold them. And they hold them really tight, where they become submitted to the fact that they can't anger the US, whatever decision they take. So this is where I would like to clarify, saying that this is a Hezbollah government is wrong, although the political opponent of Hezbollah did not accept to participate to the government, which is a normal democracy in any other country. The highest number of MPs you have, you control the government. And this is what happened in Lebanon, even if normally there is a consensus where there is an agreement among all parties that they all should be present in the cabinet. So Saad Hariri and all his group decided not to take part of this cabinet. That was their choice. But this is not a Hezbollah government. It's a government made by many cabinets who are under the US thumb and who are not allowed to work even with the US or with the US allies.
Huh. Now, well, just to expand on that a little bit, the offer that seems to be on the table from China, and I assume Russia would be involved too. We know that Syria is very open to reconstruction money and Chinese business and so on. They see it as I guess, a safer deal or a better deal. Is there a significant number of powerful people in Lebanon that is considering the deal from China, seeing it as a better deal, that you know of?
The Lebanese society is divided between those who are supportive of a deal with China and others who prefer to be without electricity and not to make a deal that upsets the West. The level of ignorance is beyond belief. I mean, if I live in a country without electricity, so 2 days ago, I had no internet because the cable was cut by accident in the street for some reason. And it took several hours to repair it. I was completely handicapped without internet. And yet you see people in Lebanon, they say, we prefer to live without electricity. Do you mean what living without electricity means? It means you can't use your fridge, you don't have light, you can't use your computer, you can't use your phone, you can't see around, you have to walk up the stairs for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 floors. And you say, I prefer to live like this, but not take the electricity from China. But that's beyond me, really.
Yeah.
But the Lebanese society is divided. It is indeed divided, where there are people who are pro-US, whatever US does, pro-France, whatever France is not doing, because it's not doing anything, and the people who are on the other side and saying, well, why not? Let us take from China. We don't need to be against the West. And this is what the whole idea is. Why we need to be against the West. We can be with the West, but at the same time, take from China and Russia and Iran. Why should we have enemies?
Well, the West, because the West says no to that, right? So
yeah,
you have to choose a side. I mean, that seems to be the deal. And a situation that we start to see more and more over and over again. You know, the much bigger picture here, and it's concerning for a lot of reasons. Now, let me get to this bonus question. So, again, you've covered wars, conflict, resistance, political upheaval in Lebanon for, several decades, and spent a lot of time there. And so I know this is a big question. I'm only looking for, I'm not looking for a lot of details, just more of your sense of things, big picture. That we've already gotten into it a little, the direction that Lebanon might take. You've made very clear sort of what their options are. But, something that I've been worried about for a long time is when we got to the end of the Trump term, which it very well might be. He may only be in power for a few more months. Netanyahu is in a very precarious political situation. Salman in Saudi Arabia seems to have been in a precarious situation continuously. All have a lot of power, but they're clear allies. They work together, but there are a lot of people who don't want them in power anymore, and they might be over in a few months. So the people who are using them as instruments or whose interests they serve can be really dangerous people. And I'm worried about the sense of urgency to get things done before one or more of these guys are out of power. Now, this is something somebody could write a book on. I realize we'll have to stay at a high level, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. The answer to the bonus question is in an extra bonus segment for patrons. So you can find that patreon.com/aroundtheempire or at the website aroundtheempire.com. Episode 175 Extra, Beirut Explosion and the Political Implications. I'm not great at marketing. It's definitely not my forte, and I don't even like it. But I'm starting to provide more bonus material for patrons. It's necessary for independent media like this, funded solely by listeners. Because I appreciate them, they make it possible to pay the overhead costs of the show and compensate a little bit for the labor that goes into it. So that's my tease. I hope some of you will subscribe on Patreon to get these kinds of extras. And now I'll continue with the interview wrap-up. All right, well, I've kept you for longer than I wanted to, although I still have like 100 questions for you. But I really appreciate it, Elijah. And please tell everyone, first of all, if there's anything else you'd like to say, please do. And also, please let everyone know where to find your work and, more importantly, how to support your work.
Well, if you go on Elijah J. Magnier on the internet, you will find my articles, and I wish people can subscribe, as many as possible, if they can, because that is my job today. The COVID-19 has limited extremely the income, and I have no intention to be submitted to any other newspaper's will not to write the truth and not to write what I know and share it with my readers.
Okay, I'll put all that information in the show notes. And again, Elijah, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Elijah Magnier. Follow Elijah on Twitter at EJMAlrai, EJMALRAI. Find and support his work at ejmagnier.com, and there's a donate button at the bottom of the page. Around the Empire podcast is independent media, and your support's really important. Pitch in if you can, patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. You can find and listen to the audio podcast in many different ways on any mobile podcast app, on the website aroundtheempire.com, at Patreon, or on YouTube. If you're listening on YouTube, hit the like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter @AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.